Hello everyone and welcome back to another Hiscurious video. Today we're going to be looking at historical events and ranking them based on how cool or interesting I find them. This is going to be a very subjective video, so heads up in case you were looking for some historical babble, just talking about the events. I'm going to brief over some of these events and then I'm going to place them in my ranking based on how important I think they are. So first off, we're going to be looking at the Enlightenment, or the Renaissance, I should probably say. The Renaissance is a very pivotal moment in human history. You had a lot of greats. Da Vinci is one of them, who was messing around with his doodaddles and little machines, and you also had this humanistic thought starting to brew up, which gave people a little bit more freedom in what they wanted to do, a little bit less persecution of the church, although that obviously did not go away completely. You still had people being locked up in their towers, but in general, I'd say this one is pretty awesome. It was very influential for the time, and on top of that, it really revolutionized the way people see the world and how we ended up progressing from, well, the Middle Ages. Second, the Mongols invasions, or the Mongol invasions throughout the world. So this also includes, I believe, Europe, Japan, China, all of these different top, regions. I think that this is gonna be a cool topic. I feel like it's being kind of overdone. You've had, everyone kind of knows that the Mongols came around, chopped off some heads, did some mass killings, wiped out entire cities. But besides that, and once Genghis Khan died, it all just fell apart. There's no real long-lasting legacy except for death and, well, I guess our gene pool. So I guess that's kind of cool. It's not something I'm too excited about, but yeah. Now we're gonna be looking at the fall of Constantinople. This was a very significant event. It led to the rise of the Ottomans, and it really solidified the end, in essence, of the Roman Empire, because after the split between the East and West, the West kind of screwed up, collapsed in on itself, and the East kept it going for a good amount of time until the Ottomans came by. The Turkic people just did not really like that, and they kind of made Istanbul the new bitch. I'd probably say it's D, because following the fall of Constantinople, the Ottomans started expanding into the Balkans, and God knows that the Balkans were already a bunch of hill people, but with religion thrown into there, it probably became a bit more extreme, so that's a solid D. The invention of penicillin. It was an accident, and because of that, I think it's definitely a have a look type of thing, a B tier, because penicillin ended up saving so many lives and increased the living standards for thousands of people and their lifespans. But at the same time, it's a little overrated, because we survived so long without it as a society. I don't know how important it is. I get a scratch, I die. What's the big deal? There will be another version of me somewhere walking around on this planet who lasts a little bit longer. Let's say he gets to 60. That would be really lucky. So have a look. The Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward is probably one of the most interesting historical events that I've actually done quite a bit of research into for my study as well. And I think that, I would probably say it's ungodly. It's interesting, but the amount of lives lost, the communal farming, that was and the famines that came from it, and then following up with that, the one-child policy, the entire combination of events with that made up the Great Leap Forward. They're all pretty gruesome. And I will just say that the Great Leap Forward was probably less shocking than the communist takeover in or the establishment of the USSR, because to grow rice, it was already more of a communal task than to grow grain, just due to the labor intensity and also the culture of the people in that region. So I feel like on considering the scale of death, it is worse than the communist takeover of the Russian Empire, but I feel like people might have been a little more passionate about it. The death of Montezuma. I think this is one of the most underappreciated events, or appreciated. It's not talked about enough for what it did. It saw the Aztec Empire just collapse, essentially. It really marked the era of the Spanish colonization period in South America, and I think that it's something that people should really focus on a little bit more, just due to the fact that once Montezuma died, it was set in stone that there's not going to be any other way than Spanish dominion. And this is kind of good and bad. If you consider colonization being a horrible thing, of course it's bad, but at the same time you do need to understand that the Aztecs themselves, they were horrific leaders towards their vassals. They would take in whoever they want, sacrifice them, cause a lot of agony for a lot of people. So I wouldn't rank them as super cool, but it's definitely worth looking deeper into. Oh, the first complaint. You already know where this is going. It's a S tier. The reason why is I love complaining. I just love complaining, and when I'm working, I also love getting a complaint. And this guy really set the narrative that you gotta complain. And this was a complaint about the grade of copper that he received. And I believe that it was in the kingdom of or something around there that this first complaint came up. And I just think it is so showing of our human character to just whine about stuff. And I think that is really interesting. And also it's a really good window into everyday life. And I think that's quite a valuable thing to have regarding history. Spanish Inquisition. I'd give that a freaky. It's a F tier. It's not really something I care too much about. I know that it caused a lot of suffering, a lot of religious persecution, got a lot of people up and running, but it's just it's used in like comedy gags quite often, and in general I feel like it's kind of overrated, especially in the comedy scene, but also in general. Of course, you got like Judas's triangle, which is one hell of a device, but it's not for me. The Boxer Rebellion. That's definitely going to be an awesome one. I think the Boxer Rebellion is one of those very underrated historical events. Not a lot of people stand still if you grow up with a Eurocentric or a Western education. The Boxer Rebellion was all about kicking out Western influence, and I think for that it was interesting because it followed these embarrassing moments for the Chinese dynasties, where the West was just essentially, feeding them opium on the coke pipe. Like they couldn't do much. So this act of resistance was very, very significant, and I think it marks this first and important idea of Chinese unity in the minds as well of the CCP, as with Chiang Kai-shek. It was really this idea to kick out foreign influence and become your own great empire again. North Koreans having nukes. That is a freaky tier. I don't trust little madman. I know he studied in Switzerland for a while. And as much as the Swiss are peace-loving people, they care more about money. And I'm not scared. I'm not sure if... Like, I believe it transferred. I believe this care about money transferred. So if Kim sees something to gain out of using a nuke, I don't think he's gonna stop. He's just gonna... He's gonna go with it, and he's gonna rock that boat. The printing press. That's an amazing piece. The printing press is essentially like the foundation of Reddit. Without the printing press, we would not have Reddit, because we would not have enough literate people. Although half of what you see on Reddit is already unreadable. But the printing press was also very important for spreading books around. The Bible, famously, but that's still... That's not what makes it cool. What makes it cool is that the guy who invented the printing press essentially stole this idea from the ancient Chinese, who were using bamboo blocks and ink. And he made it his own thing, and it worked. So I think that for stealing, he definitely gets an S tier, because stealing is cool, especially when it comes to like stealing technology. That is awesome. Let's see. The Black Plague. The Black Plague is a thing, and the reason why is it's also talked about a little bit too much, in my opinion. I'm not a very big fan of the Black Plague. We just had COVID go by, and now we're seeing another spike in COVID. So been there, done that, essentially. Of course, the scale was a lot different, but yeah, I don't think it really changes too much. The Industrial Revolution and child labor. I'd probably say that's a D tier. Once again, we could have done without the Industrial Revolution. We've been doing it a long time. The only thing that puts it above an is the fact that we had child labor, and because of how horrible the conditions were during the Industrial Revolution, we started seeing some advocacy for children's rights, and I think that's a pretty good thing to consider, because, well, children deserve to have a childhood. It's quite simple. Viking raids. Have a look. I think that Viking raids, they're always interesting, and as a child, I would imagine myself being a Viking, pillaging stuff and burning down houses. And honestly, the show Vikings also did a pretty good job at making it interesting. It's obviously a lot more than just a bunch of barbarians running around with axes. No, they had their own kingdoms, and they were very foundational for Slavic culture as well, if you consider that it was the Vikings that settled the Kievan Rus, and then also they expanded the trade network going all the way down to the Mediterranean. Quite interesting to see how integrated they were, even though it's quite often a side note in early medieval history and later medieval history, the influence that the Vikings had. Napoleon. Probably say he's freaky. Nah, he deserves a D tier. There's a reason why he just jumped over freaking. He abolished the monarchy, and then he became an emperor himself. I think this is a little bit weird, and I don't really like that. I don't like that he did that, but what I do like is that this guy, despite all the memes that were made about him at the time of being short, he still scared everyone, and he was exiled, he came back. The guy had like a really positive aura around him, and I think that's a pretty respectable thing. The Iran hostage crisis. I'd say cool. The Iran hostage crisis was a pretty messy event when a mob of Iranians entered the U.S. embassy and decided to hold the staff as hostage. And the reason why I think this is cool is not because there were people being held hostage. It's because there's this one song called Bomb Iran, and you know the banana song in Minions? Ba 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 ba. That's where it came from. And I just think that is honestly something that should be cherished. Every time I see, like, I don't know, a minion singing that banana song, I just think of what could have been. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Overdone, but did cause World War I, which is something that a lot of people study and also are just interested in. I kind of think it's overrated. I'm not the biggest fan of World War I do like the chemical weapons. It's honestly, it's And that's because the Boer Wars are awesome. The Boer Wars is where all the technology used during World War I was tested, specifically the Second Boer War. And I think that was honestly one of the coolest or most interesting. Cool is a bit of a wrong word to use. It was one of the most interesting conflicts out there. It was a really weird mix of two essentially colonial powers fighting each other, or colonial powers, remnants of colonial powers, with the Brits being colonial and the Boers, they were the descendants of the Dutch who at some point settled down. I think that's quite an interesting twist. The death of Stalin. I'm gonna have to put this at an awesome. The death of Stalin was definitely impactful. It saw the USSR transform and stagnate and eventually die off. Of course, an iron fist also starts to rust eventually. And I think that Stalin's death paved the way for some liberalization in the USSR, and also kind of started marking this end of a very fearful period for most individuals. That's not to say that the gulags disappeared or anything. They were still used, that's for sure. It's just that the random knock at night became a lot less likely for the average person. The Vietnam War. I put it in ungodly. For one reason, the Vietnam War had so many war crimes from both sides. You just need to think of the Hanoi Hilton, or the napalm bombings of villages, or the countless of massacres that happened. I believe the My Lai massacre is a very famous one, perpetrated by the U.S. It was a very much pointless war. The Vietnamese just finished off with the French, kicked the French influence out, and then you immediately had the Americans jumping in, trying to save some skin, prevent the communists from coming over. And this is years following the Korean War, so you can tell that a lot of the US soldiers, that they also were not too motivated about this. And of course you had this domino theory that, you know, if one falls, the others are going to crumble. But I think that that's kind of just a bad excuse. World War II. There's two theaters in World War II. We have the European theater and the Pacific theater. And I think that World War II, it's talked about a lot. It's cool. We saw the collapse of fascism in Italy, Romania, Germany. But at the same time, we saw divisions being made and essentially the starting point of the Cold War the second it ended. And I think that this is kind of a negative. The Cold War is a very problematic thing throughout history. It caused a lot more division than needed. World War II was a pretty, fighting the Nazis, the Japanese, and fascist forces. It was quite a clear-cut and consensual idea that we do not want to be led by fascists. So for that, I'll give it a cool. The 80 Years' War, when the Netherlands got its independence and the Spanish got to cry. It's once again, the Netherlands became independent, the lowlands as well, so we're talking about parts of Belgium and Luxembourg. But 80 years is already kind of a misnomer, and on top of that, it splintered off into a lot of religious conflict. And I'm not a very big fan of it. What I do have to say is that the Dutch King's song has a nice little reference to how they're still loyal to the Spanish crown, or not loyal, but that they honor the Spanish crown. It kind of solidified the Netherlands as the cuck country of the world. But that's okay, the cuck stool can wait. The bombing of Pearl Harbor. This is tied in with World War II. I'd say it's a bit freaky. The Japanese just came in, decided, okay, we're gonna do this, and got served. That's really what happened. They thought they did something. Turned out they didn't do something. So that's kind of meh. The end of apartheid with the victory of Nelson Mandela, I think that was a pretty awesome moment. You need to keep in mind South Africa during apartheid had a lot of very questionable actions that they took part in. A lot of conflicts that they helped fuel that were questionable, like Rhodesia, but also in Angola, they sent their troops there. And following, and let's not forget the actual apartheid, the segregation of blacks and whites. That was in its own a horrible situation. And then you get Nelson Mandela elected. He was a prisoner for being, he was labeled as a terrorist and an extremist. But he came out and he led the country and he reformed it quite well. But unfortunately, following his death, things started to change in South Africa for, I don't know if it's for the worse or the better, but they definitely started to change, and there's a lot of conversation about if it was the right way of changing the country. The Manhattan Project. I think the Manhattan Project is quite cool because it was such a pivotal project to develop the first atomic bomb that it's really hard to explain that it was such a important part of not only ending World War II, but also creating these ideas and playing into the Cold War already, because you had Soviet infiltrators within the Manhattan Project who were trying to figure out how to make the atomic bomb as well. Because prior to the end of World War II, the world already knew that the next conflict would have been probably the West against the Soviet Union and their allied states. So the Manhattan Project is definitely worth looking at. It's really influential, and I also really think that it's something people kind of overlook. We think, oh yeah, well, countries have nukes, but no one really thinks about the process and how long and how much effort it took to create this atomic bomb, from the theory all the way into the actual creation, and then its utilization in Japan. The collapse of the USSR and the election of Boris Yeltsin. I'd give it a eh. The collapse of the USSR was a good thing, don't get me wrong. But Boris Yeltsin was essentially just another way of, it's like a mask. Nothing really changed after the collapse of the USSR, at least not for Russia, and initially not for Ukraine and Belarus. Belarus to this day has not changed. Russia has, but not for the better. Boris Yeltsin set this precedent that democracy doesn't work. He had his Zadanie program, which is the yes, yes, no, which he plastered all over TV because he was sponsored by other oligarchs who had a big chunk in the media area. And this kind of started solidifying that democracy does not truly exist in Russia. The Sea People. Babe, have a look. It's a B. Kind of a... no one really knows what happened yet. We know that there's some climatic events that happened that caused the Sea People to probably be raiding. We also know that it caused the collapse of the Bronze Age economies. But besides that, it's still quite unknown, and because of that, there's not enough to say. It's interesting, that's for sure. But it's more like, yeah, who are the Sea People? That you just ponder these questions to yourself every once in a while, and that's it. The fall of Rome. Yeah. I'd say that's ungodly. The fall of Rome was probably one of the biggest disasters humanity saw. It's not and that's not just to say, oh well, Rome was so great. No, Rome was already in a decline by the time it fell. But had the Romans picked up their shtick, they could have probably at least not industrialized. That's a very big hypothetical. They could have installed some more, I guess, Mediterranean values up here in Northern Europe, and that would have been quite nice, because I don't like working hard every single day. You know, learn from the Romans and Greeks and Spanish. Have a nap. The Mongol invasion of Japan. This ties in with the Mongols. I think it's quite yeah, it's S tier. A whole series of bad luck caused that entire invasion to fail. A tsunami, then a well-prepared Japan. It was just deemed to fail from the start. 6-Day War. Say that's let's have a look. 6-Day War was really weird. Essentially, a whole coalition of Arab states decided to attack Israel, and in 6 days it was reversed. Sinai was occupied. The Arab armies were obliterated. Syria and Iraq lost a lot of their military, and also Iraq and Syria, they gave each other wrong information on purpose, which caused more casualties than needed. It shows quite a bit of dysfunction, and it also showed what Western money does. And that's why I would say, babe, have a look, because the current situation with Israel and Palestine and Lebanon, it's a horrible injustice. But the 6-Day War, that was quite an interesting thing, because that was kind of unprompted. So yeah, thank you for watching my ranking of historical events. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good day, and peace out.